The belief that we can halt the destruction of the environment by campaigning against plastic straws and bags is not only redundant, but also one of the biggest scams of the century. In my speech, I'm going to explain why we should stop putting the campaign against single-use plastic goods on such a pedestal. Allow me firstly to draw your attention towards the real statistics. Studies show that plastic straws account for less than 1% of trash in the ocean. 46% of plastic waste comes from fishing nets, and most toxins in the ocean come from the fashion and oil industry. This is why we need to inspect this campaign closer. I believe that there are three main reasons as to why the campaign against plastic has turned the supposed solution into a brand new myriad of problems. Firstly, because anti-plastic campaigns are highly insensitive to the reality of different classes. Here, I just want to touch on the sheer impracticalities of these plastic alternatives. That's to say that this hate for plastic is largely reflected in developed nations where businesses and shops can afford to use non-plastic alternatives. An example of what I'm talking about is paper straws, which are over 10 times more expensive than plastic straws. Imagine that you're a small-time vendor in a developing country who's just trying to make a living, and you use plastic straws and bags because that's what you can afford. How would it feel knowing that there are initiatives coming from people in rich, developed nations telling others that vendors like you are part of the problem because you cannot afford their questionable, eco-friendly alternatives? This is something that really highlights the hypocrisy of anti-plastic initiatives, because most everyone is part of the plastic problem. Everyone should have access to the solution. That's not what happens when the solutions proposed are largely only available to the wealthiest and largest countries and companies who can afford to implement them. But secondly, this campaign only exploits the emotional side of people without making them critical of the real issue. I want you to think back for a second. The first time you found a paper straw instead of a plastic straw in your drink. The truth is that no one likes to use these paper straws, but all of us collectively think of that one heartbreaking story where researchers found a turtle with a straw stuck in its nose. And we think, yes, plastic straws are a big problem. Paper straws must be the solution. Otherwise, why are we even putting up with them? No one ever questions the paper straw. No one ever stops to think, hey, maybe paper straws are really bad for the turtles too. Most of us just eat up whatever solutions the large companies responsible throw at us. This ignorance is only possible because of the redundant and excessive demonization of plastic in anti-plastic campaigns. This kind of solution exploits people's lack of information about climate change. Because it's predicated on the idea of personal responsibility, it's easier for people to think that they can be part of the solution if they accept minor inconveniences like putting up with paper straws. This rhetoric is useful for companies who want to avoid the blame for polluting the environment by appealing to this idea of individual responsibility. But thirdly and finally, because anti-plastic campaigns distract people from the more pressing issues. Climate change is a time-sensitive issue, and campaigning against plastic usage is not only redundant, but it takes away attention from other sources of pollution, which are far more difficult and far more important to mitigate. Things like the energy or agricultural sector barely get any attention or any acknowledgement from companies. Anti-plastic campaigns make it so easy for companies to take credit for being aware and eco-friendly after removing things like plastic packaging for their products. What they do behind the scenes is far worse than that. The sad truth is that most people don't understand how they impact the environment, especially not when redundant campaigns constantly emphasize the detrimental effects of plastic bags and straws, to the point where companies like Starbucks can literally be glorified for switching to paper while people remain ignorant of the fact that the bottles they still use are equally dangerous for the environment. These plastic straws and bags are such a small problem when compared to the fishing nets and greenhouse gases which are actually responsible for polluting the environment. Yet, everybody seems hell-bent on removing this one tiny source of pollution by campaigning against these plastic goods. So while climate change is incredibly urgent, in our haste to find a solution, we've pushed for a cure that is largely worse than the disease. That is why we shouldn't campaign against the use of plastic straws and bags.